Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to episode 0 of Divinity. This episode will mainly serve as a brief overview of the series as a whole, as well as what new viewers can come to expect from the story going forward. What is Divinity? Divinity is a trillion-year epic, recounting the creation of the universe and the events that would soon follow. Starting back in 2014 as a small pet project with only 5 characters, the story would soon develop much more throughout the years. Going from a short story to a yet incomplete graphic novel to its very short lifespan on Webtoon, my story has been through a variety of reboots and alterations throughout the years. Adding to this, I would also be distracted from the story by the world building, as well as the lore, and then the characters, and even the direction of the story as a whole. Through the years, the story has since grown and developed, and now contains over 110 unique characters. As will be discussed, the story of Divinity takes place in a world very different from our own, and follows a very robust timeline, covering the creation of the universe up until the modern day. For the purposes of this video, as well as to prevent spoiling the story, we will only be discussing the world building and lore of the story. While the word divinity doesn't have any real meaning within the story itself or to its characters, I chose to call it that as it relates to the meaning of the word itself, directly referencing the main focus of the story being on the various divine characters, as well as many of the challenges they face. Much of the inspiration for this story will also be touched upon, as some people are, I'm sure, well aware, can already draw parallels to other stories of a similar fashion. Part 2. World Building. In this part, we will briefly discuss some of the world building elements and setting of the story. To start off with, Divinity takes place in a completely different version of Earth. While much of the biodiversity and inhabitants of it are the same, there are a few key differences. To start with, many empires and cultures as we know them to exist are now absent. This is due in part that many of the gods and pantheons that were once worshipped in our history, and in some part led to the creation of these empires, no longer exist in the world of Divinity. As such, the humans in this story share a very close connection with the powers that be. Furthermore, terms such as God, deity, and demigod also don't exist, and have such been replaced with the different titles and names given to the various characters within the story. Most surprising to some is the change to that of the world itself, as many natural phenomena such as hurricanes, earthquakes, lightning, rain, and even physics to some extent are no longer governed by scientific principles, but are rather maintained and manipulated by the various characters within the story. Adding to this is the additional moon now orbiting the Earth. As gravity and tidal forces are now governed through other means, this has little to no effect on the story as a whole, or to the Earth as a whole. While many of the old cultures no longer exist within this story, there are many prominent kingdoms and civilizations within this story. This is due to the fact that even though now humans share a very close connection with many of the higher powers, this has also led to the creation of many vast empires who now seek to benefit from this closer connection, trying to gain favor from many of the characters in order to grow their influence or power even more. In this part, we will be discussing the characters as well as a little more of the in-universe lore. As discussed, much of the story follows the main pantheon of characters, from their creation to their eventual rise to prominence. As we discussed in an earlier part, much of the world's functions and phenomenon are now closely linked to this group. Other functions are also maintained by minor characters that also have yet to be unveiled. And in general, They all work together to maintain the universe and promote its longevity. While some characters are tied to natural phenomena such as lightning and earthquakes, some of them hold more abstract roles. This can be likened to Greek mythology, as Zeus was likened to storms and lightning, while the other goddess Aphrodite had more sway over emotions, which is something more abstract. In the world of divinity, much of the history mirrors that of our own. However, in the field of science, much of what we consider it is largely absent. This is due in part as many of the natural processes we may study in this world no longer exist. An example is how rain is no longer a result of natural means within the story, but rather the temperament and will of a certain individual, who has yet to be uncovered. Of course, that is not to say that technology has not advanced, as regardless of how means occur, humans can and will always find the means to harnessing the capability to advance themselves. And because of this, throughout the story, humans have developed at a similar rate as we have today. In this last part, we will be covering some of the central themes and much of the inspiration for the story. Much of the themes of Divinity centers around the importance of maintaining balance as well as the constant changes within the world. As the story takes place in constant flux, shifting from one era to the next. Some of the main inspiration from the story obviously came from Greek mythology, as much of the myths within seek to explain and attribute natural phenomenon to the various Olympic gods within the story. Just like Zeus was once blamed for lightnings and storms within the story of Divinity, this is more true and factual rather than in our world where it's merely just a story. Likewise, much of the stories in Greek mythology don't center around a single story, rather a collection of stories, just as my story centers around the creation of the universe up until the modern day for what was the Greeks. My story follows the creation of the universe up until the modern day. In a similar vein, much of my ideas for world building and even characters came from my love of reading the lore and stories of DC and Marvel, as both have a variety of cosmic entities/deities that help maintain and oversee the universe. Some of these characters, such as the Living Tribunal, Eternity, and other cosmic entities, always intrigued me. As such, they each had a role to play within the story and were a central part to each of the universes. While DC was not as plentiful in terms of cosmic entities, it did a fantastic job of creating a very complex and well thought out map of the universe/multiverse, showcasing not only various alternate versions of Earth, but also the various pocket dimensions outside of the normal universes. Some inspiration also came from the Bible, as the book of Genesis takes place in a setting before the universe was created, as well as accounting the events leading up to its creation. While I could spend a very long time covering many of the small and many of the larger influences and inspirations of this story, I mainly want to cover one that I could honestly say started it all, and that is the show Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm sure many people have heard of, seen, or themselves have watched the show. Growing up with Avatar not only introduced me to foreign concepts such as spirits and bending, but also presented a very unique story and world-building setting as a whole. As even though it strayed from science due to bending existing, much of the nations in the world are influenced by their element in very real-world ways. For example, the Fire Nation having the means to produce fire allowed it to, advance extremely fast technology-wise, outcompeting other nations to battleships, to tanks, and eventually, if you've gotten far enough in the show, airships. In a very similar way, the Earth Kingdom, with its ability to manipulate the Earth, gave way to the ability to create massive walls and cities. However, they still lacked many of the technological feats that some of the other developed nations, mainly the Fire Nation, had. This meant that much of their technology was a lot of brute force and labor, which is why they had to rely much on the ostriches to pull carts around or use bending to move items around. And another example was the sequel Legend of Korra. While much of the technology has made very large advancements from the car to the radio and even a skyscraper-sized mech, it proved to me you can have a fantasy setting while still maintaining real-world science. As from the time of the first show, much of the world has developed in the way of Republic City, with new laws, cars, and many developments that mirror much of that of our own. Lastly, I wanted to discuss the art style. While I do love to write stories and designing characters, I am not extremely talented when it comes to the field of art. However, that being said, it is by no means a reason for me to stop doing this, and no longer an excuse for me to not pursue this channel. While the artwork isn't going to win me any awards, I do still want to get this story out by any means possible, and will continue to do so. And in this last part, we will just be doing some ending statements as well as going over the schedule for the story going forward. This mainly concludes the overview for Divinity. I want to thank you all for watching this far into the video, and I hope you enjoyed learning as much as you can about the lore and story. And I hope you look forward to learning more of how this world will work. Moving forward, the story is going to go consisting of about 5-minute videos or episodes posted every Sunday. If you have any questions about the story, feel free to comment them down below, and be sure to subscribe in order to catch every new installment of the series. Lastly, after every 4 episodes of the series, I will be posting a Q&A. This is just to answer any questions that people might send to me in comments regarding characters or lore or any of the world building, which I am excited for. Again, I want to thank you for watching this far, as well as all the people that have pushed me to getting this far. I want to thank my nephew in part, as he has been a very large part of pushing me to finally make this channel and get my story out there. Thank you, and see you on the next episode, coming next Sunday, episode 2.